Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tracing one of the most surprising and honestly fascinating culinary journeys in human history. I mean, sushi feels like a truly universal food, doesn't it? You can find it in tiny corner restaurants, massive sprawling supermarkets, airport terminals, and of course, highly exclusive fine dining spots all over the globe. But here's the thing. This dish did not start out as the elegant, fresh global phenomenon we know and love today. It actually began as an ancient, highly practical, and kind of gritty method for survival. So if I asked you right now where sushi was invented, your mind immediately goes to Japan, right? Maybe you're picturing a master chef carefully slicing pristine raw fish in a high-end, modern Tokyo restaurant. But prepare to have your assumptions totally challenged. Because as we dig into the history here, the very first iterations of sushi didn't start in fancy restaurants. And actually, they didn't even start in Japan. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our itinerary for today's explainer. We're going to trace this geographical and chronological journey of culinary adaptation in 5 quick parts. First, from preservation to plate. Second, Ito's fast food revolution. Third, crossing the ocean. Fourth, the California roll effect. And finally, the modern sushi phenomenon. Let's start with part 1, from preservation to plate. Look, early sushi wasn't about a delicate flavor experience at all. It was entirely about survival and food storage. Over 1,000 years ago, historians trace the true origins of sushi not to Japan, but actually to Southeast Asia. From there, the concept slowly migrated and evolved over centuries, hitting a major turning point in the 1800s during Japan's Edo period. And then, by the late 1800s, massive political changes sparked a global spread that changed the trajectory of the food forever.
The contrast between ancient and modern sushi is genuinely shocking. Ancient Southeast Asians created what we call early sushi by packing fish in tightly fermented rice. Why? To keep it edible longer. It was purely a preservation technique. And here is the craziest part. They actually threw the rice away. The rice was literally just a storage vessel to ferment the fish for months. Now compare that to the modern sushi we know today, where fresh fish sits perfectly on top of seasoned, vinegared rice, and they are eaten together as a single unified bite. It is a total 180-degree shift. Moving on to part 2, Edo's fast food revolution.
Welcome to Edo, the city we now know today as Tokyo. Back in the 1800s, the city was bustling. People were constantly busy and, well, a months-long fermentation process just wasn't going to cut it anymore. So, Japanese chefs innovated. They started serving fresh fish directly over vinegared rice. They called it nigiri sushi. And this brilliantly illustrates how the dish was totally transformed to meet the needs of a busy working population. It was quick, it was convenient, and it was exceptionally easy to eat on the go. Nigiri was, historically speaking, the ultimate fast food, laying the very foundation for sushi's future worldwide success.
Which brings us to part 3, crossing the ocean.
So, for centuries under the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan was strictly isolated from the rest of the world. But that all changed in the late 1800s with the Meiji Restoration. Japan opened its doors to trade and diplomacy. Japanese merchants, workers, and students began traveling abroad to places like Hawaii, Brazil, and the west coast of the United States. And naturally, when they moved, they brought their food traditions with them. They planted the very first seeds of sushi's global expansion. But there was a major hurdle here. Westerners at the time found the whole concept of raw fish highly unusual and honestly a bit intimidating. So early immigrant restaurants had to start adjusting their ingredients to slowly introduce curious locals to these brand new flavors. The real tipping point for global exposure, though, that came right after World War II. Stronger cultural and economic ties rapidly developed between Japan and the U.S. American soldiers who had been stationed in Japan returned home with a real taste for Japanese cuisine. Then, jumping to the 1960s and 70s, Japanese businesses started expanding internationally. In major cultural hubs, specifically Los Angeles and New York, Japanese restaurants began attracting business people, celebrities, and highly curious diners. Sushi started shedding its unusual label and rapidly gained a reputation as something modern, stylish, and incredibly sophisticated. And that leads perfectly into part 4, the California roll effect.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that this was an absolute stroke of marketing genius. An ingenious North American invention permanently bridged the cultural gap for people who were still just a little too scared to eat raw fish. Step 1. Substitute the intimidating raw fish with familiar imitation crab. Step 2. Add avocado to provide a rich, satisfying texture. And Step 3, and this is just brilliant, hide the unfamiliar dark green seaweed on the inside of the rice so it doesn't scare off the unsuspecting customer. This specific deconstruction made sushi totally approachable. It was the ultimate training wheels dish for first-time eaters, and it turned sushi into a massive, unstoppable trend.
Let's move to part 5 and see how this builds. The modern sushi phenomenon.
Boom! The world gets smaller and sushi gets everywhere. Simultaneous technological and cultural forces really drove this rapid global explosion. You have refrigeration technology suddenly allowing fresh, authentic seafood to be safely transported and served thousands of miles away from the ocean. You have television, magazines, and the early internet heavily promoting sushi as the ultimate stylish, modern meal. And of course, you have global tourism surging, travelers visiting Japan, trying authentic sushi, and bringing that intense curiosity right back to their home countries. So the crucial point is that sushi became highly flexible. It fully transitioned from a niche restaurant offering to a daily staple. The next time you grab a quick plastic tray of sushi at the supermarket, remember you're actively participating in this massive cultural shift. Because of its simple fish, rice, and lighter portions, it became heavily linked to the healthy eating movement, completely contrasting with heavy processed fast foods. It's also incredibly visually appealing, right? Making it one of the most photographed meals on social media. And it spawned entire new industries, meal kits, conveyor belt dining, and endless modern fusion cuisines. Sushi literally cemented itself as an everyday fixture of our modern globalized food culture.
But, we do have to pause for a second and look at the whole picture. With massive worldwide popularity comes a very sobering reality. The rising global demand for tuna and other seafood to supply the world's endless sushi habit has created critical, very real concerns regarding ocean sustainability. Environmental groups and top chefs alike are actively raising the alarm that our appetite for sushi is heavily straining our oceans. It's leading to a desperate, urgent need for responsible fishing practices. However, if there's one major takeaway we've learned today, it's that sushi is ultimately defined by its ability to adapt. Alongside traditional nigiri and those modern fusion rolls, we are seeing significant, exciting growth in plant-based, vegan sushi and heavily monitored sustainable sourcing. Think about it, from ancient Southeast Asia preserving fish in fermented rice, to hiding seaweed in a California roll, to creating entirely plant-based seafood today. Sushi survives because it constantly evolves while still honoring its roots. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. As our global sustainability challenges continue to rise, how will sushi adapt next to survive the future? What will the sushi of 100 years from now even look like? It's a fascinating question for an undeniably fascinating food. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I absolutely can't wait to dive into our next topic with you.